There are 5 wealth killers that you definitely need to avoid if you want to build wealth. If you avoid these 5 things, you can save not just a few thousand, but 10 or even hundreds of thousands of euros. And that's exactly what today's video on Northern Finance is about. My name is Alex Black. Yes, the top wealth destroyer is divorce, which really tops it all. It's no surprise, but we have some extremely interesting statistics on that. In the last 20 years, between 30 and 56% of all marriages that were closed in Germany ended in divorce, as you can see nicely in this graphic. Fortunately, the rate has decreased over the last few years, which is a good sign in itself. In the EU, around 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Here are the latest figures from 2020. There were 1.4 million new marriages and divorces. One way or another, the likelihood that you'll go through a divorce at some point is quite high if you get married. For example, I wouldn't get on a plane if there was a 30 to 56% chance that we would crash. That's the reality of marriages, or rather, divorces today. Even though a divorce isn't a plane crash, the financial consequences are significant and worth discussing. Those who remarry after their first marriage, according to USA statistics, have a higher chance of divorcing again, with rates at 60% or even 73%. 73% chance that this marriage will also end in divorce. Divorce usually costs quite a bit, and there are many reasons for that. For example, lawyers in Germany charge an average of 3,126 euros per divorce, which means 1,113 euros per person, and the value of the proceedings must be under 1 million euros. If you have a wife to whom you have to pay alimony, about 45% of your net income goes directly to her, so almost half if she doesn't have a job. If she does have a job, your alimony payment is reduced by the amount she earns. You have to pay this amount for a quarter to a third of the duration of the entire marriage after the divorce, meaning if you were married for 12 years, you will pay for about 4 years nearly half of your net income as alimony for your ex-wife or ex-husband. That means you're paying nearly 2 whole years' worth of your net salary to your ex-partner over those 4 years. And you can just think for yourself how expensive that would actually be for you in your case, especially if there are salary increases in the coming years. If you have children, here you can see the so-called Düsseldorf table, which shows how much you have to pay in monthly child support per child. For example, do you earn between 2,000 and 2,900 euros net? If you have one child who's 8 and another who's 12, you pay 607 plus 710 euros in child support for the kids, in addition to all the other payments to your ex-partner that we just talked about. As you can see, it all adds up quite a bit, and if possible, both of you should sign a prenuptial agreement at the notary during or before the marriage. Here you can, for example, agree on what's called a separation of property. In this case, for example, the assets from your wife's ETF portfolio and yours are completely separate, as well as the respective capital gains from it. As you can see here, this has disadvantages in the event of death, for example, from the spouse. Feel free to hit pause to read this. The second big wealth destroyer is high interest debt. Yes, I know what I'm talking about, because these high interest debts of other people make me and our entire community of PP credit investors, which is the largest in Germany, wealthier alongside the big banks. Debt is not bad per se, and it can often be worthwhile to take on debt in order to invest it in useful things such as renovations, for example, to invest in or in a completely new house. But if you're financing a new television or a vacation, such as a trip to the beach, you're paying interest to bring that consumption forward before you can actually afford it in cash. Here you can see the average interest rates at banks for consumer loans in Germany, which are currently at 8.2%. But the bank doesn't always grant this interest rate or even a loan at all, and many just use their credit card, or the overdraft, which is also a loan from the bank, just doesn't go by that name and costs money, or also the credit card. Here are, for example, the interest rates on checks can go up to 24.79% per year for credit cards in Germany, and it can be even higher if you need the money urgently and, for example, you need it quickly. For example, if you've accumulated debt over the years and have the interest rate mentioned earlier on your credit card, you'll pay 206.58 in just 1 month for not being able to wait until you actually had the money for that consumption. And in a year, that whole thing will cost you 2,479, so not waiting definitely comes with a high price, especially when you can't wait for many things. And no matter how much interest you pay, It's not worth going into debt for luxury brands like Louis Vuitton, because by doing that, you're just making the shareholders of LVMH your lender, which is your bank, and everyone else outside of you rich. And some might say, if I buy something with Klarna, for example, if I buy something, then paying in 3 installments doesn't cost anything, and I can pay later. And yes, that's true. Klarna debts may seem free at first, but watch out if you don't stick to the 3 agreed installment payments. Then this colorful website will no longer be valid, saying that only 1% of all payments at Klarna are installment payments with up to 14% interest and 99% are interest-free. Because the buy now, pay later business model relies on a portion of customers not paying on time. Of course, that's the case, and we shouldn't hide that because lending money for free is definitely not a business model that works here. And I think that makes sense to everyone. So claiming that 99% of the payments are interest-free is completely false, because your debts are quickly sold off by Klarna to a collection agency and they handle the billing, not Klarna itself. And I bet those collection payments aren't included in the 99% statistic here. And if you like videos like this, then give me a like and subscribe because we post 2 new videos every week. Let's move on to number 3, the desire to get rich quickly. People aren't very patient by nature. That's just how it is. And I notice it in myself every time I stand at a traffic light and have to wait more than 10 seconds, I get impatient, or when I have to wait 60 seconds for the microwave to finish cooking. How are you supposed to wait 15 years until the ETF savings plan finally pays off? We want Bitcoin to double overnight to 2001 and the next salary increase to be 40%. But wanting to get rich quickly is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. That's what my great role model Warren Buffett says too. Because then suddenly Ponzi schemes pop up with, for example, 100% interest and more. Yes, promised interest. Of course, they'll never get paid. Or we put our money, influenced by Reddit Wall Street bets, into risky options trading instead of solid stocks or ETFs that we don't really understand, and we lose our money faster than we can blink. Or we take on too much risk as a third option, betting the value of the entire house on a single stock or borrowing money to invest it in risky ventures. We forget one of the most important lessons from this man here, Warren Buffett. He says that successful investing requires time, discipline, and patience. No matter how great the talent or effort is, some things just take time. You can't give birth to a baby in a month by getting 9 women pregnant. And that's true. Moving on to number 4, the car. For many, it's identification and passion. For me, the car is just an expensive fun. We also made a popular video titled How Much You Need to Earn to Afford a New Car, which we've linked for you here in the info card and also down in the video description. And in our society, success is unfortunately still equated with big expensive cars. But unfortunately, you can't see who financed the car, who paid in cash, and who can easily afford it. That would be pretty cool, but unfortunately it's not possible. That's why we just do it through the car, and that's obviously not very helpful. New cars in Germany are financed in almost 50% of cases, while used cars are financed in about a third of cases. Overall, 40% of all car purchases in Germany are financed through a loan. And that's often one of the most expensive consumer loans that people really take on in their lives. Because a car not only loses value quickly, especially in the first 6 years after purchase, as you can see here, but you also pay more interest on a car loan than on loans of similar amounts for other expenses, since the car depreciates over time. For example, in contrast to a property. And if you can no longer keep up with your car loan, the leasing company or the car dealer has to sell the car as quickly as possible to avoid any further loss for them. 2001. That's why you're paying between 5.1 and 7.11% interest per year, according to Handelsblatt. Sounds okay at first, but if we enter this into an interest calculator, for example, with 20,000 euros for a used car that we want to finance here and 7.11% interest, then we end up paying more than 4,500 euros in just 3 years for this car, not to mention the depreciation we also have to consider, along with additional costs for insurance, repairs, and the vehicle inspection, etc. But not everyone gets this interest rate. Unfortunately, there are few or no statistics on loans for used cars in Germany. But if we look at the USA, we see that much higher interest rates can also be reached quickly, depending on creditworthiness, up to 21.55% per year. Let's assume that you get a lower interest rate here, so not the absolute highest and worst, but still quite significant at 12.5. Such or even higher rates can sometimes be obtained directly from the used car dealer when you take out financing in Germany. Let's assume that you pay this 12.5% interest for 3 years. You'll end up with 8,400 euros in interest after just 3 years. That's a really expensive hobby. As I said, I've also linked the video on how much car you can afford with your salary down in the video description. A very exciting video that many of you really appreciated. So on to number 5, waiting it out. 2001, you've probably heard that the prices for real estate, for example, despite their recent setback in 2022 and 2023, are still too high, and one should wait a bit longer with the investment until the values correct downwards significantly again, like here, for example. It's clearly visible with commercial real estate. The problem is, in almost all cases, it just doesn't happen. ECB devalues purchasing power by 2% yearly through inflation. Inflation erodes wealth, money isn't productive, real estate may rally as ECB cuts rates, Eurozone can't afford high rates, ECB will keep rates low, inflating real estate. It's not just risky because inflation keeps eating away at your wealth and your money isn't productive, even if you park it in precious metals like gold, which can gain value, but also because there could be a rally in real estate prices at any moment, especially now that the ECB is lowering interest rates faster than expected. This last factor in particular shouldn't be underestimated, because I personally believe that Eurozone countries can no longer afford to keep interest rates high given the massive debts we've all accumulated as states. The ECB will be forced to keep interest rates close to zero for several years, which will inflate real estate markets again in their valuations, and then there won't be a good entry point anymore. So there are 3 factors working against you if you wait and stay on the sidelines. 1,000, it's just going to keep going up. So those are 3 factors that work against you if you wait and stand on the sidelines. The same goes for the stock market, as we can see very clearly here since 1959 in the German DAX. There have been setbacks and various crises over the decades, but in the long run things have always gone up, and even the most recent setback during Corona has long since been made up for. If you had invested right before the Corona crash at what seems like a really bad price in hindsight, you would still be up 42% today from that supposedly bad price of 13,500 points, because the DAX has now climbed to almost 20,000 points. You just have to invest your money if you don't want to lose it in our system. This graph from 1981 to 2021 shows ice cream is 10x more expensive, bread is 2.6x more expensive, potatoes are 4x more expensive, and eggs are 2.6x more expensive. Only beer is relatively cheap, doubling in price. Still, you lose half your purchasing power on beer. Only the beer is relatively cheap and has only doubled in price. Still, you've lost half of your purchasing power if you want to spend it all on beer. So, if you want to start investing, click on this video here about the best ETFs, or this video about my biggest investments in peer-to-peer loans, which are the debts of other people. Let me know your opinion on the 5 wealth destroyers in the comments below, and what else you would like to add as another wealth destroyer. I'm looking forward to the exchange, and I wish you a good return without wealth destroyers, and see you next time.